Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is time now for another edition of the most disruptive show covering news, politics, events, and more from across this United States and the surface of our increasingly divided globe. In the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, a burning ember in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, good morning, everybody. Hope you're having a good one. Let's get into the headlines. First up, in COVID news, there were more than 25,595 new COVID cases reported in the United States yesterday, with about 416 new deaths. Over the past week, there's been an average of 24,794 cases per day. That's a decrease of 37% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 39% of the American public has been fully vaccinated, and 49% of residents have received at least one dose. Those are all residents, not just adults. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected more than 33,137,000 people across the United States and killed almost 590,000 people total, 589,933 to be exact, using this one source. Anyway, a new strain of coronavirus circulating in the United Kingdom and thought to have originated in India is highly likely to be more transmissible than the wild-type coronavirus. This, however, comes as more than 80% of the British over 65 population is already vaccinated, and the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine bears an estimated 88% efficacy against the new variant that compares favorably to its 93% protection against the variant seen circulating in Britain over the winter. The AstraZeneca vaccine, meanwhile, is far less effective against both variants at 60% and 66% effectiveness efficacy, respectively. Those are for the new one and then the old one. New variants and then the old variant. Anyway, in national political news, the ranking police officer at the scene of the killing of Ronald Green 2 years ago lied to internal investigators about whether or not he had body cam footage from the killing of Green. He said that he didn't. That footage has come out in the past month. He also told investigators that Green was a flight risk, effectively, escape risk, while shackled, which the video apparently makes clear he wasn't. In international, and there's another domestic story we're coming back to, but it's tech news, so it's technically at the end. Anyway, international news. Russia is giving Google 24 hours to remove banned content from their service in the country. The videos in question contain information on violence, drugs, and material from extremist organizations. If Google does not comply, Russia says they will be fined between $10,000 and about $54,000 American dollars and possibly be forcibly slowed down in Russia. Google's Russia arm declined to address this, and their 24 hours expire today at noon. I've got to say, that is the tiniest amount of money you can think of fining an organization like Google. 10 to 50,000 American dollars. I think Google usually thinks, okay, like fines in terms of like the tens or hundreds of millions of dollars or something like, I don't know. We can come back to that. Anyway, U.S. Secretary of State Blinken is in Israel to attempt to consolidate the brief ceasefire between the Israeli military and combatants in Gaza. He will be visiting Benjamin Netanyahu before meeting with Mahmoud Abbas, continuing the trip with visits to Egypt and Jordan. Australia is closing its embassy in Afghanistan this week, saying it cannot adequately prevent violence against its forces while American troops are withdrawing. That's a process which has seen increasing attacks by the Taliban. The withdrawal, I mean. President Biden has accused President Alexander Lukashenko of Belarus of attacking the free press and political dissent. This follows Lukashenko's decision to forcefully reroute a Ryanair plane to the Minsk airport, where Roman Protasevich, a 26-year-old political blogger and dissident, was taken into government custody. And coming back to domestic politics here in the States, in tech news, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed a bill that will allow individuals to sue big tech companies over censorship. The victim can sue for up to $100,000 per proven claim, and this bill can open the door for Donald Trump getting unbanned from Twitter and suing for damages. And with that, those are your headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Tomorrow, you're chuckling.
it's just, I mean, wow. This is becoming their dogma.
The censorship thing?
I don't know about the censorship thing, but Trump. I mean, this is the golden statue stuff. I mean, they're getting to the point where they're changing laws in order to go after companies that had the, you know, the temerity to censor Trump for putting out bogus information on during a pandemic. I mean, I am not for them censoring Trump. It's not that. It's more so that these guys are normally under this notion that this is a private entity. The private entity can do whatever they want. Now, all of a sudden, this private entity shouldn't be able to do what they want, and this is a censorship issue. And all of this is going around this issue of Donald Trump once again. It's just astonishing. That's all. It's just pretty intense. I mean, look, I'm one of those people who are somewhat of an alarmist in the way that the political party has organized itself. The idea that you basically have a party that is still pining for a guy that got impeached. Twice. And basically was inspiring a putsch attempt against the government of the United States itself.
I don't buy that one.
And a party. Well, yeah, you may disagree with that. I firmly believe that. And on top of that, even this notion of the repudiation of the election. Like, even if you disagree with the putsch attempt stuff, I think you would agree with me that his whole mantra has been the election is false. Meaning everything that has taken place up to this point is illegitimate. That's his standing, right? And you have a party that is basically lined up saying, yes, this is where we're going to stand in regards to going forward. It's not policy. They haven't changed policy. It's rhetoric stuff, and it's allegiance. It's almost like fealty. It's like Liz Cheney could vote like 90-something%. That's not enough. That means it's more than that. Lindsey Graham hasn't changed any of his policies. He's still Lindsey Graham. And yet, Lindsey Graham is in the N Club. He's there. So what is it? What's the distinction in it? If it's not, I'm voting with you in these numbers. If it's not allegiance in regards to policy, what is it? It's something else. That's why I don't buy this stuff of like, oh, no, it's not about the election. The election is settled and everything else. Nonsense.
But isn't it just fundamentally about the base's allegiance to Trump?
I don't know. I mean, the ability for Trump to, basically say, that guy's bad, don't vote for him, or that guy's bad, don't send money to him, or for that matter, even intimidation, that type of stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, but is that all power on some level?
What do you mean by that?
The ability to wield the masses in regards to your ends. Like, you may have financial power in a sense, but Trump's power is more of a populist thing. It's not him, I'm throwing millions of dollars at something. It's, I can get on some kind of platform, I can make a statement about something, and the individuals will be injured by that statement. Well, that's his strength.
It's true, but that is also the political strength in our version of politics. If you have people who get into positions of explicit political power by being elected to those positions,
right,
then if you're a figure who can keep people or help people get elected, if you can keep them from being elected or help them get elected either way, if you're the gatekeeper who sits between them and quote unquote electability, the likelihood that they're going to get elected, whatever, then you're a pretty powerful person. If you can force people to pay a fine for that, either in political support or literally through bribery, like I'm sure some people do, then you'll be a much more powerful person once you've done that for a while. Now Trump, you can see this at CPAC. One of the main things that he talked about at CPAC was how influential he was in electing people. Yeah. And of course, he's speaking.
I can see him brag about that.
Yeah, and you can go back and listen to it too. Yeah. He is speaking not just to a political audience, but obviously to a lot of members of the conservative political class, the core of the conservative political class. And the message that he wanted to make very clear through the core of his speech was, if you support me and if I like you, I will help you get elected and it will work.
Yeah.
And he's probably right. Is the thing.
That is power, right? I mean, and even if you don't, even the notion that, okay, we think Trump has that ability, even that's power. It's a Game of Thrones thing. Power is where people think power dwells. Yeah. That type of stuff. It could be a shadow on the wall, and people are like, right there. I mean, but in Donald Trump's case, Donald Trump, he can brag about it because on some level it's true. And you can look at, go back for the moment to when Donald Trump initially started to run. I mean, man, talk about the world change. This is not just UFOs. This is also, in a clear, just political sense, right? You have Donald Trump. They laughed at him. And all of those was like, oh, he has no chance. Oh, he's no chance. He's a carnival act. that he's running and all this other stuff. And 18 Republicans took a bullet. And even when Donald Trump was president, many of those guys still would not fall in line. Donald Trump is out of office. They've banned him on Twitter, and every last one of them have lined up in allegiance.
Well, of course, and that's what spurred this conversation, sparked it. Is we specifically were talking about the last headline had to do with Trump, which is how we got on the subject. But it was Ron DeSantis in Florida, basically letting people. I'll just read the headline again. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed a bill that would allow individuals to sue big tech companies over censorship. The victim can sue for up to $100,000 per proven claim. This bill can open the door for Donald Trump getting unbanned from Twitter and suing for damages. $100,000 per victim per claim is kind of a lot of money for tech censorship. I feel like there should be some sort of sliding scale. But then I got into thinking, this was as I was reading the headline, how do you do that exactly? Like, is it based on your presence?
How egregious.
Well, or how egregious the censorship was exactly.
Like, and who could use it? Could a Palestinian group, like the AP reporter that was kicked out of the AP for her coverage of Palestinians, could somebody who, let's say, got banned from Twitter because they were supporting Palestinian causes come back and say, hey, you banned me because of my political distinction. This is wrong. I'm suing you for that.
Yeah.
And yeah, like you said, what's more egregious? Like, how do you, who's on that scale of saying, okay, this is more egregious in regards to you? And what does this mean? Like, is this extending the First Amendment?
I don't know.
To tech?
$100,000 is, in the grand scheme of things, for a lot of the entities that would probably be suing, for a small number of high-profile entities, it's not that much money. It's not nearly, like Donald Trump, for instance. If he got $100,000 for being taken off Twitter, would you see that as like, okay, $100,000 makes sense for Donald Trump? I think it would be millions. And then for the vast majority of people, it would be significantly less than $100,000, probably a fine or something like that, because a post of yours got taken down without good cause, or because your account got suspended and you depended on it for work and that kind of thing. Like, there's a sliding scale here. But the $100,000, what that does is it puts a familiar big price tag that a lot of the Republican base and just people in general can look at and be like, wow, that's kind of a big bill that this dude just signed. And you remember Kim Iverson talking about how she saw Governor Ron DeSantis as the future of the Republican Party?
Yeah.
This is the kind of thing that he's doing to cement himself as that future. You know what I mean? $100,000 is a decent amount of money for the average person. For somebody like Donald Trump, not nearly as much, but
the fact, I mean, the $100,000, it's a price tag. I guess my thing is, what does this mean? Like, what are we doing? Is it extending the First Amendment?
Oh, yeah, you're asking the basic question about
the basic
bill.
question.
Yeah.
I mean, the basic fundamental question. I mean, because basically you're saying tech has a limit in regards to what it can do in regards to its own platform.
Yes.
Period.
That seems to be the consensus across the board.
That's basically what
the
it's being
political
said.
establishment as a whole agrees with that, by the way. It's just whether it's more censorship or less censorship that tech could
Democrats
be
say
doing.
you should take out more information. You should show less. There should be less data.
Yeah.
And Republicans say, for the reasons that they want to be able to lie, you should allow more. I mean, and so you have this notion of, okay, free speech versus not, even though the regions are egregious. Both of these sides aren't. Like, both of these sides are somewhat horrendous, right? I mean, one side says, well, we want to be able to say the hydrochloroquine is a cure.
Hydroxychloroquine.
Hydroxychloroquine, thank you. Is a cure to COVID, and that all of the vaccine stuff is nonsense, and we need to open the store. That's what we want to be able to do.
There's still a small case to be made for hydroxychloroquine, not as a general cure, but at a certain point in the illness.
I get
your point. I do get your point.
The other group is like, well, we don't want them to be able to say that, and we don't want them to be able to say that, Hunter Biden had anything to do but love and light. And, it's like you have these two weird sides that are pushing purely for political reasons in regards to what they want. And you have the American public who's just like, God, man, can I just get a fair system where, you keep out Nazis, but no, you don't try to block these guys from talking? Like, it's very, very, very grotesque in some weird way.
The Nazi thing, I mean, go there for a second. How many, so you're an average person on Facebook.
Right.
Imagine Facebook is the wildest of Wild Wests.
Right.
And there's no moderation. There are no police for the Nazis. Who go, like anti-Nazi police. I'm not talking about, I'm like inverse Gestapo.
Yeah.
Who keep the Nazis at bay, not the Gestapo themselves, is my point. How many Nazis would you actually see? I don't think the average person, he might come across like 2 Nazis in the course of their entire digital lifespan.
It depends on how your society trends.
Well, yeah, but I hear you, but I feel, again, this
Meaning,
is
if your society starts getting bad,
classically,
that number will go up.
people argue that when you try to suppress beliefs in a more or less liberal society,
Makes it worse.
you tend to incentivize them, because you it's not just the Streisand effect where you attract people's attention to like, ooh, what are they trying to cover up?
Yeah.
But you also add a sense of rebelliousness to those beliefs, and in a society which is in various ways in decline. Rebellion against that society starts to make more sense, and so people are attracted to it. If it's seen as like, oh, this is a way that things are going wrong and how I can maybe fix them, then you know what I mean.
It's like, if I don't allow crack, how many crackheads would I get? That type of stuff. Like, how many people are just going to say, yeah, I want to try crack now that crack is on the market to be
I hear you.
to be used.
I hear
I mean,
you.
that's what it sounds like. Look, I don't know. I don't know how many Nazis you get. I think it depends on how your society trends. If you start getting a more violent society, a more repressed society, a society where people are in more difficult straits, then yeah, you may have this kind of fracture in your society where some people may trend towards certain behaviors. I think the more concern, or the biggest concern, is having this kind of balkanized spot. For example, I don't want Rick Santorum kicked off the air, even though he's just gotten kicked off the air. I want Rick Santorum, when he says some stuff about Native Americans, for somebody to be able to say, Rick, that's ridiculous. Now, I don't want Rick Santorum to be on his own little platform where you have a bunch of Santorums and you have a bunch of people who are saying, hey, this guy is the word of God. And Santorum is just there by himself, sputtering off stuff to Santorum. I don't want that. I think that's worse. So to your point, I agree with you in that on some level. By the same token, I also look at and think, it's not an absolute, because I do see the problem if you would have somebody who, let's say with a vaccine thing, right? And you have 600,000 people dead and somebody says the vaccine doesn't work and it takes off like wildfire. And people said, they just said, okay, well, we're not going to use it for that.
But isn't this something,
that type of stuff.
Like, shouldn't we be pissed at politicians who are effectively the ones driving this process for having effectively given up on Americans? I'll put it like this.
And being able to make a choice.
Yeah, if they trusted us to think through this for ourselves, you get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
They wouldn't feel the need to suppress any of the quote unquote disinformation or misinformation or whatever. They would engage in open dialogue and try to push back using logic and reason, all these things. And you can say, okay, well, would that work or not? Should they have given up on the average American? But if that's the question that you're actually asking, then we admit the idea that they probably have in a deeper sense. And then we're forced to ask, okay, but how do we respond to that? Do I want to be given up on by a politician? And what does that practically mean from the perspective of the political establishment? And I think
Beta accompli, my friend.
It is that serious. But wait, what'd you say there?
Beta accompli.
It's already happened.
It's already happened.
I hear you.
It's been happened. Done.
This is done and gone, Shane. All right. And with that, inspiring words this morning, let's go into our break.
That's pretty cynical. But look, I honestly think that politics, the art of it, on some level, is this intermediary between, let's say, a power center. People who are basically either paying these guys and pushing these guys and pushing a particular agenda, and these guys being an intermediary, but also a manic, pushing of a population in a direction. It's like, I need you guys to go in this direction. I need you guys to go in this direction. I mean, if you think about the national agenda, who sets it?
Yeah, but I'll put it, I don't know. Okay, so maybe you got to go into the break. A couple of weeks ago, I was watching World War II propaganda films. Like propaganda films, like by the Americans, because it's interesting. It's
they're fascinating films. The Brits or the German films. The
propaganda, the patriotism, all that stuff is so out on the surface in a way that feels genuinely honest to me, because it's like, these are our beliefs. This is what we believe in. We're saying it, and it wasn't insulting. It wasn't even demeaning. It was just a film. And this is World War II. They're working with Hollywood directors. They're working with people who know how to do what they're doing. So the film itself is well done by the standards of the time. Anyway.
Over the top, this makes it feel honest.
Yeah,
it's like it feels on the surface.
in a weird way. That's kind of where I'm going with it. The over the topness, the fact and I guess where else I would go with this is, it felt like it was leading in a certain direction, and the way that they related to the Soviets was interesting. I don't know. It feels dramatically different now. It doesn't feel like I'm being spoken to honestly.
No, it's subversive now.
Yeah, and it felt like
Department of Defense.
That messaging felt
Department of War.
That messaging felt self-consistent.
Yeah.
In a way that I don't get from American politics right now. It seems like it's gotten a lot more hypocritical. That's, I guess, and I don't like the politics of the World War II. I like some of them, the anti-fascist stuff for sure, but the anti-communist stuff, which it started to verge into a little bit towards the end, not really because they were still friends with the Soviets, but
Uncle Joe. Yeah.
But It's just,
But I know what you mean. I know exactly what you mean.
But it was way more self-consistent than where we are now. It was way more honest.
It's more
way
honest.
More respectable.
Department of War versus the Department of Defense. Which is it?
Yeah.
Like how often has it been defense as opposed to this notion of war? The Department of War was more honest. And I think that gets to this notion of this kind of change in the rhetoric, change in the way we talk about our politics. Yeah, I agree with you. It's over the top, like patriotic. But I guess the question is, how were they accepting it back then? Did they accept it as, okay, this is so over the top, or did they accept it as, okay, this is just reality as reality is? Like, we're looking at it as a propaganda film. I don't think they looked at it as a propaganda film. I think they looked at it as, this is just reality the way reality is.
I think that's the question to ask, but I don't think that humans have undergone intense cognitive development over the past 60 years to the point where we're suddenly a different species. I think people have been pretty damn consistent. And arguably, the smartest human that's ever lived has lived in the past, not in the present, just based on the law of numbers or something like that. I think we're just people. So I guess my take is they probably were both propagandized by it and saw it for what it was, but the ideals were consistent with what they'd been taught growing up, that they were willing to accept it. They were like, okay, I get this messaging. This is where we're heading. I'll go in for it. At this point, I don't see a government agency that can put out messaging that's going to be entirely self-consistent in a way that feels genuine to me. Yeah. It feels like there's going to be a hole pretty up near the surface and definitely deep down in the core of the thing. Anyway, we got to go out. We're over time by a wide margin here. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, going into a break, coming back on the other side in our soapbox segment with Jamarl's monologue and a possible short back and forth. Be right back.
Fault Lines.
When the going gets tough, the powerful want propaganda, but we won't let them cancel the facts. Whether you're woke or drowsy, we know that you can handle the truth, and we're giving it to you every morning. Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan every Monday through Friday from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern. Your first stop for sanity in a world gone mad.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM at 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share this audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps makes this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. We will probably be accepting calls at the end of the hour, so hang around. George Floyd and the protests. The New York Times came out with an article called "A Year After George Floyd, Pressure to Add Police Amid Rising Crime." Now, the point that the article is basically making is, well, there's somewhat of a contradiction here. Now, I'm going to point out that I made the point about this contradiction a while ago when all of this started, when I was working at Political Misfits, when I said, the issue here is poverty. You should be fighting on poverty, and it's awkward to have a fight on defund the police because it is questionable on whether or not the public would agree with you on the notion of defund the police, meaning the wider public, the public that you have to basically convince of your cause. And at the root of all of this stuff, or a lot of this stuff, is poverty. It is without question that poverty has an aspect to it that incentivizes crime. And whatever that number is, let's say that number is 30%, let's say that number is 40%. If you could get rid of that and wipe off 40% of crime, why would you not do that? What would be the financial number that would be worth getting rid of 30 or 40% of crime? And I would say that most of the public would say, yes, if we could get rid of crime by investing X amount, we should do it. And we should do that. But that's not where we are. What we typically get is the public saying, all right, we're going to throw in cops because we're going to be tough about it. And throwing in cops to basically do jobs that cops can't necessarily do. So you have a demoralized police force, a citizenry that is very angry and upset, and it has every right to be angry, upset, because the citizens are being killed by those same cops. And everybody is angry and cantankerous. The honest truth of it is that the push, and the strong push, should have been on this notion of poverty. But that's almost besides the point at this point. We are, a year or so into the protest, or beyond the protest. And the catch becomes crime is on the uptick. Now, the honest truth is crime was on the uptick, if I am not mistaken, before the Floyd protests, during the beginning of the lockdown. But whether it was before the protests or whether it was during the protests, and also just to make a point, crime is up across the board, not just in areas or cities that protested, but across the board. And a case can be made that every city basically was up in protest. That's a fair point. But in all of these cities, with the exception of maybe a few, crime, murders, up. In some cases, more dramatically than others. So when you call and say you want to defund the police and murders are up, how does that work? How does that work? How does that look? I understand when a cop puts his knee on a man's throat for all of that time and that man chokes to death in broad, horrific terms. I get the level of anger and frustration and resentment associated with that. But I'm talking about now, a year out, Chauvin prosecuted. Those cop killings will continue. Because, again, cops are being put in situations to do things that they have no capacity to absolutely do. So, again, defund the police. How does that work now? Do you make that case? Can you make that case? Can you still persist with that very specific argument? What is black politics a year after George Floyd? What does it look like? And I would make the case that I made back then. It has to be beyond theatrical. It has to go beyond this notion of a shiny object. And this shiny object would persist in and of itself as enough, as opposed to actual, real, physical matter, reality things that are a benefit to the large community. Again, if it is indeed going with this notion of specifically black politics. Black Lives Matter ends up getting somewhat of a lightning rod for this. But I would make the case that this goes on some level into a political space. Defund the police has to be, should have been what it was before, which was an attack, broad attack on this notion and this idea of poverty in general. That's where it needs to go. That's where it needs to be. And I would make the case to you that this in and of itself will be somewhat of an attack on this notion of crime. But going beyond the notion of crime, though, going into the political space itself, because on some level, that's where you need to be and if you're going to get any change. It can't be theatrical. It can't be, here's Kamala Harris. She's somewhat black. Aren't you now entertained? It can't be that. It has to be more than that. Back in the 60s, you would get a black person put into a position of authority and people would clap. They're like, oh, they're so progressive. Look at that. Look at that. This is 2020. That can't work today. That can't be the standard for today. And when people are looking at the political space, African Americans, what is the number of people who voted for Joe Biden? What, like 90%? And with that number, you still can't pull and get what you want in the political space? What about something like Medicare for all? Does that benefit your particular class? Look at the number of people that died or that were injured in COVID. What about the medical bills that are coming after that? Are those things dramatic? Do those things adversely affect your community? If the answer is yes, how do you, with 90% influence, allow a candidate to walk by and skate on either Medicare for all or either $15 an hour? Those things are dramatic to you. Even if they are distributed across the population itself, that is less important to the fact that they are dramatically important to you. I'm making the point that with that level of influence, there should be expectations. If there's going to be any change in black politics, it's that. It's the notion of expectations that go beyond this idea of a shiny object. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're going to be back. We're going to have a conversation about it. And we're going to be taking your calls. Thanks all.
Fault Lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
What do we want?
News, politics, and culture.
When do we want it? Wait, we weren't finished. News, politics, and culture without the red and blue spin.
Okay, so now when do you want it?
Daily from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Time.
Okay, satisfied now?
Never. Tune into Political Misfits on 105.5 FM in Washington, D.C. and on 102.9 and 104.7 FM in Kansas City, Missouri. Daily for our analytical fix. No surrender.
Fault lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. And so I just gave a monologue on this notion of what does black politics look like after George Floyd, after Chauvin is prosecuted, after the years long of protests. And on some level, you know, anybody would say black politics. A lot of people would mention this notion of Black Lives Matter. That's probably the largest conversation point or political point that people make on this front. And of course, their cry was defund the police. If you go back to Political Misfits, I was the lone gunman, last man on the wall, saying, wait, not this. Poverty, that's your point. Like if you're talking about something that can organically take down the number of police killings, all right, what if instead of having those cops going through those bad neighborhoods over and over again in the way that many of the documents said that they were doing when they were trying to, you know, beef up their numbers or to criminalize poverty in order to get an increase in their city budgets and whatnot, get rid of those horrible cities. Get rid of those crumbling schools. Get rid of that stuff. Stop growing horrible circumstances or horrible people in horrible circumstances. Stop that. And if you stop that, you would get to a point where you could organically take down the number of cops. That's the way you do it, right? And if you're going to scream defund the police, you're going to come with contradictions. Now, my thought was politically, it would be untenable to make that work. I didn't even foresee the murder rate just spiking up over something like this. But to be honest, and again, to be fair, all of this is taking place within the context of COVID. And you've had murders that have been down on historic levels. I'm putting less emphasis on that one because that still sounds grim. But I guess my point, the larger point is, regardless of police killings and everything else, all of that stuff is horrible. By the same token, you know, what is the society that the people are in that this stuff is happening in? And is it that? If cops can't fix that, then why do I want to continuously send cops into that situation? That's the first point. But on the second point, why do I want to continuously send cops into that situation if the issue here is that it is a horrible community and the community needs to be fixed? It's the cops is an easy answer. It's the political dodge of sorts. When it's, all right, we need to fix that particular community because that particular community is in disrepute. Instead of that being the conversation, it's, okay, we're going to put in cops. And cops have been in a situation where these guys they don't have the tools to do what this community is asking them to do. It's a dodge. And so it's like you look at that and you think to yourself, all right, if there's a movement that needs to do something about this situation, do I want to defund the cops, which is the dodge that politicians are throwing into this? Or do I want to say, no, the politicians need to do their jobs? And their jobs in this case is get rid of poverty. That's the point. And instead of it, and I get they got a poverty program within the context of defund the police, but the screaming was that defund the police. And now we have a contradiction. Murders are going up. And no person in their right mind, there will be some people who are hardcore. There will be even some people on this network, hardcore, still screw it, defund the police. And it's like, dude, murders are up like 60%. Defund the police. They will still be there. But your community is not going to be there. My mom will not be there. My mom would be like, yeah, screw that, boo. We need the cops. That's what she would say. And that's an honest take by somebody who's in it. And those are the people who you're going to pretty much have to get. So what do you do with this? What do you do with that? The issue is poverty. That's where the fight needs to be. That's where the fight needs to be now, if we're talking about what takes place after George Floyd. What are your thoughts?
And poverty, while it is clearly different racial groups in America make different amounts of money, and I'm not trying to just different racial groups by leaving black people out of the mix. That's obviously what we're talking about.
Look, but Hispanics, Asians,
it's true. But at the same time, That's a fairly diffuse and long-term problem that you can't solve merely by reforming an institution like the police, which is itself a pretty darn big class of people and professionals, and they've got their. The thing is, the police are responsible they're not responsible necessarily for. Sure, they solve specific problems. They go out and solve crimes, but they're not there to solve society's ills. Broadly, they are there to protect law and order. They are there to protect the law and maintain through the law a civil order where people are committing few enough crimes out in the public that you have, the ongoing sort of regular functioning of the state of affairs. And of course, the claim here is that the state is fundamentally biased against black people. It historically has been, and that the police are these sort of executors of the state's racism in the way that they disproportionately carry out arrests and attacks and killings and all these things on black people. That seems to be the state of the criticism against them. And then the calls to defund the police almost invariably.
It's like a blunt instrument.
Well, yeah, but they're also not talking about entirely eradicating the police. They're talking about more or less radically reforming it and changing what it looks like, changing its priorities and responsibilities, obligations, all that stuff. But if you want to solve the economy, and I agree, if you're going to solve something that seems to be quite a bit closer to the nub than just policing, how do you do that practically? Because the immediate proximate call, if you want to solve it along a specific racial line, is something like reparations, where you have an immediate redistribution of wealth.
Oh, I didn't even go there.
I hear you.
Yeah, I didn't even go there.
And if we go there, if we do it too soon, and if we do it while other parts of our economy are in a state of disrepair, we're kind of probably going to screw ourselves over, because it would be costly.
You're going to get a backlash.
Well, and not just a backlash, but economically, depending on the amount of money that you're looking to invest, it could. If the crime is big, then the price tag is too. And therefore, what I think would make sense, if I had to wave my hands and think I know everything and make my way happen, I would want us to have wages rise naturally across the board.
Yeah.
I would want us to have enough money where we could use some of it productively on reparations. And that seems like that would solve the problems broadly. Yeah. And it would create a rising tide for everybody. Now, I don't know how the hell we do that. And the politicians, as we cover in innumerable quantities in terms of our specific criticisms on the show, politicians generally aren't at that point.
Yeah.
They're not able to do that kind of thing. We're not in that upswing sort of mode. But if I could wave my magic wand, that's what I would have happen. And I think I just laid out the state of affairs there. Now, if everybody could just stop arguing, or at least trying to kill each other
it's like
in some places.
Solved it. It's finished.
No, that doesn't do anything.
I feel you. I get it. I mean, it just seems like the issue here is like, I want to disincentivize certain behaviors naturally, right? I don't want to have a cop with a hero complex running in a community that is in disrepute. And it's like the Batman thing where there's like, okay, Batman has spent 20 years fighting crime, beating up bad guys, putting people in jail and everything else. Instead, Bruce Wayne could have used all of his money to just upscale all of Gotham and got rid of crime.
That is the baseline critique.
Yeah, that's the baseline criticism.
For all this money you're spending on these fancy flight suits and cars.
How much did he spend on the car? How much did he spend on the bat suit? He built
well, but he designs that himself, doesn't he?
That's the thing. Superman.
If the MIC, if the military industrial complex is designing all this stuff itself, and it's just a money mill that's effectively funding their R&D, that's just how the world works, bro.
That's kind of my point, though. That's precisely my point, though. Like Bruce Wayne. I mean, Bruce Wayne had the ability to get rid of basically all of crime out of Gotham by making it inconsequential, or at the very least,
I don't know.
In a
weird way, you probably give Bruce Wayne more credit in that case than Bruce Wayne does himself, despite the fact that Bruce Wayne is a comic book character.
Yeah, right.
We're completely talking on that level.
I'm making a point that
could he solve all the problems?
Right.
I think you think more of rich people than rich people do, Jamarl. I think that's something that progressives might get wrong. Rich people are sort of stuck on this too. If you look at the weight of any one rich person compared to the weight of the governments of the world combined, and all of the other rich people, you take the richest person in the world, Elon Musk.
Yeah.
Compare his wealth to the wealth of the sovereign capital funds of any given nation. And when you combine them together, the nations around the world, he is like a tadpole in the Mississippi.
That's why I focus on government. Well, that's why I focus on government.
I hear you.
And I make the point of saying, look, make them do their jobs. And doing their jobs has to go beyond, okay, we're just going to fund more cops to go into this community and we're going to be tough on crime, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Look, I get it. On some level, you need to have firefighters to put out the fires in some sort of way, as an analogy goes.
It'd be good if they would do that consistently. What do you think of the idea of like the 19th century robber baron capitalists turned philanthropists with their like noblesse oblige and the like sense, oh, we've made this money, let's fund libraries and do good for the world. What's your take on that? That kind of thing.
I mean, usually it's stuff that they just care about or
that they're personally interested in.
It's like, okay, I'm going to invest in this particular building and I'm going to give all of this money to this building. And it's like, a Mormon library for something.
Let's go on this archaeological dig.
Yeah.
That will give me rare artifacts.
Yeah. It's not, I would love it if it's, hey, we're going to build this. Okay, we're going to take this dilapidated factory. We're going to use like great wealth. And it's going to be a automated greenhouse that produces food for this particular community for dirt cheap. I would love that. That would be cool. Phenomenal. And I would be like, wow, that is phenomenal. Look at what they're using their money for. They could put these things in all of these communities and everything else. And they're making $1 or they're making 2 cents, an enterprise as opposed to taking a salary. Love that. You would have me on the show. Bravo. That would be me. And you'd be like, wow, because at that point I would be like, yeah, great job. These guys are using their wealth.
They're doing good things with it.
They were doing their good things with it.
They've become powerful, and now they're doing cool stuff with that power.
Yes.
And that's all that, I feel like if we lived in a society where the people who became powerful universally did cool stuff with their power,
there would be no socialists.
We would be in a good place. The universe would be a lot better. It'd be a lot more interesting.
There would be no socialists. There would be no socialists. There would be no communists. The argument wouldn't fly.
I think the argument would kind of break down.
Yeah, the argument would break down.
Yeah.
A different world. But that's not the world where we are. And the very fact that, that this is the world, we get opposition to the world that we have. But no, I really do believe, this is a government issue. And like you said, it's not a individual thing.
Did Bezos take Musk on the wealth rankings? So Bezos is number 1, but he got a divorce. I'm sorry, I'm talking to my producer, Austin. But Bezos got a divorce. I know Amazon's big. Yeah, apparently Bezos is, again, the wealthiest person in the world. Fact
Even
correct.
After the divorce.
Fact check on myself. Even after the divorce, that's what I'm saying. Mackenzie Bezos came away with, I forget how many tens of billions of dollars.
COVID.
You think COVID and Amazon and...
Well, no, COVID made, Bezos, am I wrong on this? Made a ton of money off of COVID. Yes, right, COVID. Because of all of the deliveries and everything else that was associated with COVID. Of course, Bezos made God's amounts of money.
I believe it.
That probably brought him over the line.
Well, now he's going to space.
Money.
Yeah, so it's
from COVID.
Pivoting off of the conversation we were just having, kind of, and we are taking your calls. I think we're going out into our break in a couple of minutes, so that's a natural point. If anybody wants to call in, we will be going full deep into taking your calls, but particularly if it's on topic. We've been covering a bunch of ground, but hey, 202-521-1320. But this conversation, Bezos, Musk, what they're both doing.
They're in competition.
They're in competition for space stuff, not just for making money, but for spending it on getting out into the interstellar space, or at least the stellar space.
Rich people trying to leave the world.
They're both trying to leave the world. They both have those like primeval kid dreams, boy dreams or whatever, of like, I want to have, fly a spaceship to the moon. And if you're a sci-fi kid who grows up reading certain kinds of books, you're like, wait, why aren't we doing this again?
Yeah.
We seem to be on the cusp of this kind of thing. And then if you get wealthy, if you get more powerful, you're like, you have good reason to think you might be able to influence it. God, and they are.
I hate that.
Why do you hate that though? Because I can see, go for it.
If it was me, I would do it. Yes. If it was me, like if I,
do you hate that it's not you? What is it? What is it?
No, it's not that I hate that it's not me. It's not that. It's rich. Every rich person thinks, "Oh, you just hate me for my wealth and my thing." No, that's not it.
No, I hear you.
It's it has more to do with this notion that I would rather us leave as a world. It feels weird to me that an individual says, "I have so much wealth. I've gained so much more resources than anybody else on the planet.
So
that I have now used my great wealth to leave the world
independently." Yeah,
independently.
I hear you.
And what do? Get a base on Mars?
So if Musk
do they take
or
a patch of
Bezos,
land? Do they take a world?
If they
Can
had
Bezos buy Mars?
I hear you. Or a portion of it. I'm sure at some point. I'm sure at some point.
It just feels weird to me. But we're leaving as people.
Yeah, but I hear you. But take if Bezos or Musk had a broad vision of like, okay, we're all going to the stars.
Yeah,
I'm going to set up some colony ships. Here's a lottery process. We're going to take the people for this ship from a rough distribution from around the country and increasingly from around the world. We want to send colonies out into space, and it's going to be all privately funded, but it's going to be all publicly owned when we get there. But what we see this as the most important thing that we can do with our money, and we're only going to live so long. We really want to get this done. And again, free self-running societies, completely autonomous. We're not going to have private control of them in any way. But you're going to have to go into hibernation. You get where I'm going with this.
But I mean, that's the conversation about like, hey, what if Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos took a dilapidated building and put automation to make food and etc. That's that conversation again. If they did that, hey, they could do that on Earth, right? Hey, we're going to buy a patch of land in Africa, wherever it is, and we're going to build this colony, this community that's going to be self-sustaining.
There's some people. I hear you.
I would love for them to do something like that. I would love people to do that. That's a human thing, right? Well, we're humanity going into space, we're going together, etc. But that's not typically the way that stuff functions. That typically functions with, all right, what am I going to get out of this? Because the entire lifespan that the individual has lived at this point has been gain and the acquisition that's ownership.
That's the fundamental turning point of any sort of free-floating spirit as it gains power. You gain power on the upswing. Power can be liquidated. You can use your money or your social capital, these different things. But what do you do with it? And then there's this conversation about legacy and how that comes in. Leaving something to the world gives it a greater sense of meaning and gives you depth in your life, that whole thing. And so people pursue that. But, oh man, we should go to a break. There was one thing that I really got caught up on, but I've now forgotten it. And so I'm just gonna take us out. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, 202-521-1320. We've got 2 callers on the line, but room for more. 202-521-1320. You're listening to Fault Lines. Be right back on the other side of this short break.
Fault Lines.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we are back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we're taking your calls, 202-521-1320. I remembered my point almost as soon as I stopped talking. Sometimes you just need to, turn the water faucet off and it clears up or something like that. Is seasteading. You're talking about how there's, where do you see billionaires going out and creating viable societies on the face of this earth that are functioning, that run on green tech, that are really cool, that are replicable so other people can do that kind of thing too. Yeah, the Jacques Fresco style ideas, not just with his specific image, but that kind of approach to like fundamentally reforming things.
I think that's phenomenal. I mean, just so what people are talking about, it's like you're setting up these communities. And Fresco's idea, but it doesn't have to be Fresco, like you said. It's
self-sustaining, self-supportive, experimental.
It's automated. Like Fresco's idea was, you create automated societies. That the issue of the fundamental problem with society is work. Get rid of labor. And you get rid of labor using computers, AI, technology. And you can have technology that maintains like crops, maintains like analysis of that stuff. And you set up your world in an automated fashion where labor becomes a thing of the past.
Well, so loads and loads of people have done this kind of thing over a couple hundred years with very good historical documentation. Tons of socialist startup societies over the past several hundred years. And then you go back further, and whether it's religious societies or other types, you see plenty of different small-scale attempts to create something viable as an alternative to how society works. It's often been religious, interestingly enough, but definitely not exclusively. Plenty of more agnostic or atheistic ones recently. Anyway, part of the problem here, I think, is just that land has become so scarce. And that's what the very simple version of it. What you'd have to do, specifically in the sort of post-Westphalian period, even though we've been living in it for a very long time right now, pretty much every square meter of land is, solely claimed by one nation or another. And then some plots of land are claimed by more than one nation, and there's conflict over them. But
that's the other problem.
But that's the thing. And the one exception to this, two exceptions technically, you either have space, which of course we've been talking about, or you have the seas. And there is this idea of seasteading, which is basically creating, Waterworld style floating platforms, albeit much more high tech than Waterworld, where you can live and grow your own food and function as a society. And I hear people talking about those, but like mostly the people who are associated with those, for one thing, it's experimental. Nobody's actually think there was a couple that tried it and they got like almost arrested. They were like refugees in Thailand. I'm not kidding. A couple who was trying this idea.
Yeah.
Nobody's really done it. And the people who are backing it, it's like Peter Thiel, billionaires,
Yeah.
who, people like you and I would have plenty of reason to disagree with on many things, Thiel specifically. Anyway, we're taking your calls. 202-521-1320. That's where I was going with that. We've got John calling from LA. John, you're on the line. What's on your mind?
Good morning, everybody. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Jamarl, I love you. Your monologue. Okay, I understand what you're saying, but I've been through Minneapolis. I've been through the square. That whole 8-block section has changed. That whole neighborhood has changed. They are doing what they need to do. Here's the problem. The politicians are not, because they are bought and sold by people like the police and their union. That's the problem with that. If they would just actually defund the police, meaning, and this is what they meant by it, I don't understand why no one gets it. $450 million for police? No. You all are going to run on $20 million, and the rest of that's going to go into hospitals, libraries, community centers, making neighborhoods not such a food desert, and schools especially, and programs in school and after school. That's what defund the police means.
John, I think here's the thing, is that defund the police is it's a gradient. It's not just one thing, and it's not just a gradient along one dimension. It's just not just more money or less money. It's like, okay, which responsibilities do you want police to have? What's their role supposed to be? How many people are not, it's not just how many people are supposed to be on staff, but what should they be trained to do? What should they be responsible for handling? What role do they have in the community? All those questions. And you can walk down you can have a conversation about defunding the police. But at a certain point, a lot of people are like, you go too far, and they're like, no, you don't want police to carry guns, even though they're supposed to enforce violent crimes. Now, I'm not saying you're saying that, but some people would say that violent crime included should be managed through peaceful means by the community and not by the police in the vast majority of cases. And for a lot of people listening to that, they're like, I don't know how that would work, and I don't think you know what you're doing. So no, that's kind of their response. But what I would argue with the numbers, I would argue that's a significant enough reduction, that particularly in the case of a big city. If you go down from $450 million in total funding to $20 million, that's a huge shock that obviously, it's intended, but it might backfire on you pretty tremendously. And so I would be a bit more cautious than that. But the kind of conversation you're having, yeah, that's what a lot of people meant by it. But there was this thing where some people were talking about entirely replacing policing as an institution. Jamarl, am I wrong?
Yeah, some people were calling for abolish, but let's put those people on the margins. And look, I know what defund the police mean. I might say I was the last person on the wall saying it should be about poverty. It should be about poverty. But if you listen to Political Misfits, I was like, look, the momentum is going in this direction. You got me. I'm there with you. Let's have this fight on defund the police. No, I totally understand what it means. This notion of pulling money from the police and putting it into social programs. But look, this gets to the argument about the black politics stuff that I was making before, that it can't be theatrical. And this notion that politicians get up there and it's like, okay, we're going to put in cops to a situation that doesn't fly. It really does get into this notion of, okay, what are you using your political capital for? Well, if we're voting for Democrats to the point of 90%, it needs to be for more than just, okay, Kamala Harris is vice president. It has to be for more than that. I mean, this gets to your point of you saying, well, politicians are basically not doing their job. 1,000% agree. And this is me not taking a hit at defund the police in the context of, how can I say it? I get that the protests and everything else were beneficial. So that's not where I am. I'm just getting to this point of when we're talking about change, I mean, for God's sake, if we're talking about murders, so for example, Kansas City, it goes from 174 to 150, I'm sorry, from 151 to 174. You have Dallas, 199 to 245. You have Philadelphia, 346 to 469. These are human beings that are losing their lives, that are dying on the streets. You have, Cincinnati, or right here, Milwaukee, 98 to 191. that is a 94% jump. That's astonishing. I mean, how do you, as a person, let's say, not an activist, person living in those communities, you're not on the street protesting, but you're there, and you hear numbers like that, and you hear defund the police. Does that still work today? I mean, I'm not taking a shot at any of the protests and everything else. I'm asking a different question. It's a year after George Floyd. The murder rate has gone up, and I suspect that the murder rate has a lot more to do with COVID than the protests. But whether it does or not is almost besides the point. It's there. Does the same argument fly? Yay or nay? I don't think it does. I think it's a difficult argument to make if you're staying somewhere with a murder rate that has jumped 57%, like Atlanta, going from 95 to 150. I think people are going to say there's a fire, send in a fireman. I'm asking, this is a political question, not necessarily a mechanical question. Fair enough. But I think it's an apt one. What message do you use going forward? And do you still press the issue of defund the police? I don't know if it works in this context.
No, no, I think that you need, well, and you bring it up, you bring it to economics, which is where I tried to go with it for a while. I'm trying different tacks in this conversation, but, and you're right about that. And I guess there's a way in which the phrase, the beatings will continue until morale improves. Yeah. On a ship, right. That idea. Right. Police shouldn't be used in that capacity in our society. Clearly it shouldn't be the case that they're there to keep, dissent down, to keep there from being a mutiny. And then you have, miserableness everywhere else. You should have a functional society first and foremost. And if you do that, then you have less police and less need for them, I would argue, and I'd wager. But the question is, okay, how do you make the society more functional? And that gets more complicated, and we talk about it all the time, but I don't know, man.
I mean, murders were across the board up. Like, I'm looking at these numbers. These numbers are jarring. And look, I don't have this belief in my head that it's all of the protests of the cause of the. That's not where I'm going with this at all. This was during COVID. This was weird. I think I've said this before, that the COVID stuff. Oh, let's go to the other caller.
Michael, calling in from Sydney. Michael, you're on the line. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hey guys. Just to pick up on an earlier point, about propaganda and Star Wars and stuff like that. There is a good book you guys might be interested in. It was made a movie as well out of China called The Three-Body Problem. It's won the Hugo Prize.
Yeah, sci-fi book. I've heard of that one.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. I think you guys would be interested in investigating that. Especially you, Shane, I think you'd find it interesting. And also, Jamarl, you love talking about Star Trek. Well, I sort of view Star Trek as propaganda in a lot of ways. You sort of got the Klingons, or like the Russians, and the Romulans, who are like the Muslim extremists, and you got the Borg, who are like the Chinese, the hive mind, and they're always fighting with the Federation over values, and the individual always wins out over the collective, and it's always about the individual being outstanding as opposed to the collective being outstanding. And but also, I mean, on the defund the police issue, I think the real issue is you can have both. You have a simultaneous redirecting of police funds, while not necessarily decreasing the budget. You don't have to decrease the police budget; you have to redirect it with things like community policing, and you can actually take from other areas of society to fund poverty alleviation programs. There are plenty of rich people running around with billions of dollars in loose change in their pockets, wasting on going to Mars, and we can't get this planet right. I mean, what's the point of going to Mars?
I like them, but also, Michael, our stock market is propped up by those rich people. How dare you suggest that they reallocate some of their funds? No, I mean, I hear you. Sorry for cutting you off. And the three-body problem, thank you for the recommendation, and thank you for personalizing it. I have heard good things about that. And a couple of years ago, I believe when that came out, it's part of a series, I think, and it's written by, I think, like you said, by a Chinese author, and it was seen as like, is this this sign of a new golden age in Chinese sci-fi? Remember people talking about that.
It was that good.
It was that good.
What is it about?
Aliens and humans coming into contact with aliens, and I forget exactly more than that, but it's, I think it has something to do with, I don't know. I haven't read it, any of it. I mentioned Ted Chiang. Michael, thank you for the call. Really appreciate it. Michael calling in from Sydney. We're just about closing this out. I mentioned Ted Chiang. I believe that's how you pronounce his last name. Chiang. He's a good sci-fi guy I've been reading recently. I grew up reading Philip K. Dick, though. The sort of more psychological stuff, which I would still strongly recommend to anybody. Good for thinking about this stuff. Psychological sci-fi, sort of. Yeah. Plays with your mind all the time, which you would know if you've seen Scanner Darkly, the film directed by Richard Linklater. Good stuff. Anyway, you guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're going into our hour break, and we'll be back in a minute with headlines and another 2 hours of this morning's show. Be right back.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, precipitously perched at the edge of this resilient and exploited globe. Welcome to your context lens for the American perspective. In the left corner, I am your ever-vigilant, your indefatigable political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
That would strongly imply that you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
A mistake you should not make, Jamarl, a mistake I make occasionally. I got into reading the chat, and people were talking about my bicycle hat. I'm wearing like a bicycling, cycling cap.
Into this other world, and it's like, oh, right.
Exactly, I know, it's terrible, and I'm good throughout the hour, but we have that like minute break there, so I get distracted. Anyway, please take it.
No, you're fine. It happens. It happens. It's one of those things. It's like you're right. You do get slightly, pulled in. Totally get it. Let's do the headlines. In the news, more than 25,595 new COVID cases were reported in the United States yesterday, with about 416 new deaths. Over the past week, there's been an average of 24,794 cases per day, a decrease of 37% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 39% of the American public has been fully vaccinated, and 49% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected more than 33,137,938 people across the United States and has killed 589,933. A new strain of coronavirus circulating in the United Kingdom and thought to have originated in India is, quote, highly likely, unquote, to be more transmittable than a wild-type coronavirus. This comes as 80% of the British over 65 population is vaccinated, and the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine bears an estimated 88% efficacy against the new variant, comparing favorably to its 93% protection against the variant seen circulating in Britain over the winter. The AstraZeneca vaccine is far less effective against both variants at 60% and 66% effectiveness, respectively. The ranking police officer at the scene of the killing of Ronald Green 2 years ago lied to internal investigators about whether or not he had body cam footage from the death of Green, saying that he didn't. The footage has come out in the past month. He told investigators that Green was a flight threat while shackled, which the video makes clear he was not. That video is gruesome, or at the very least, what took place in regards to Green is gruesome. We're going to talk about it a little bit later. Russia is giving Google 24 hours to remove banned content from their service in the country. The video in question contains information on violence, drugs, and materials from extremist organizations. If Google does not comply, Russia says it would be issued a fine of $10,800 to $54,000 and possibly be forcibly slowed down in Russia. Google's Russia arm declined to address this, and their 24-hour expires today at noon. U.S. Secretary of State Blinken is in Israel to attempt to consolidate the brief ceasefire between the Israeli military and combatants in Gaza. He will be visiting Benjamin Netanyahu before meeting Mahmoud Abbas, continuing the trip to visit Egypt and Jordan. Australia is closing its embassy in Afghanistan this week, saying it cannot adequately prevent violence against its forces while American troops are withdrawing, a process which has seen increasing attacks by the Taliban. President Biden has accused President Alexander Lukashenko of Belarus of attacking the free press and political dissent following the forced rerouting of a Ryanair jet to Minsk airport, where Roman Petrovic, a 26-year-old political blogger and dissident, was taken into government custody. And Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed a bill that would allow individuals to sue big tech over censorship. The victim can sue for $100,000 per proven claim, and this bill can open the door for Donald Trump getting unbanned from Twitter, suing for damages. Those are your headlines. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. You know, the case with the gentleman that was killed right here, the Ronald Green case, I plopped that in to the headlines because that case was gruesome. I was sitting there reading this as I was riding over. The guy seemed to be basically being tortured. And they said, well, I didn't have a video camera. This was the person who was at the scene, the main cop that was at the scene. And he says, oh, I didn't have any video cam. There was nothing to see here, et cetera, et cetera. And then all of a sudden, after 2 years, it pops up. And there's times where he points to the video camera saying like, hey, it's on, you know, or somebody like points and he cuts it off. At other points, I mean, it's like extreme stuff.